The northern Persian Gulf on a Wednesday in August has heat the way it has water, completely and without apology. The surface temperature of the water runs to 32 degrees Celsius in the shallows near the Iranian coast, and the air above it is the specific kind of hot that does not feel like weather so much as an engineering decision. The visibility is theoretically good, no fog, no precipitation. But the heat haze off the water surface creates a shimmer at surface level that compresses the horizon and gives distant objects the quality of suggestions rather than facts. Fishermen work these waters every morning. Dhows cross between the Iranian coast and the UAE ports on schedules determined by commerce rather than by any military calendar. The surface radar picture at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday in August shows 30, 40, 50 contacts in the northern Gulf, most of them innocent, all of them generating the ambient noise in the tactical picture that adversary planners have always found useful. This ambient noise was specifically useful to the IRGCN planning element that had spent 6 weeks developing the operation that began at 4:50 on that Wednesday morning, when 2 vessels departed the IRGCN logistics facility at Bandar Abbas under cover of the pre-dawn darkness and the commercial traffic of the early morning fishing fleet. One vessel was a Hendijan-class patrol boat, small, fast at approximately 35 knots, armed with a recoilless rifle and a heavy machine gun, and painted in the flat gray that the IRGCN uses for its naval assets, as opposed to the white that it uses for its Coast Guard vessels. The Hendijan's crew had their orders, and a route that would take them southwest into the shipping lane west of Abu Musa Island. The second vessel was older and slower. It was a converted fishing vessel, approximately 18 meters, with a modified aft deck that had been reconfigured to allow the deployment of objects over the stern while underway. It was running without its AIS transponder. It was running without navigation lights. Its crew of 4 had their own orders, and their orders were considerably more consequential than the Hendijan's. The plan, as the IRGCN operations staff had conceived it, used a principle as old as naval warfare and as current as the morning watch brief. If the opponent is watching the loud thing, he may not notice the quiet thing. The Hendijan was the loud thing. Its job was to appear in USS Bulkeley's operating area at a range and bearing that would generate a contact report, a classification action, and the elevated watch-standing attention that IRGCN fast attack craft provoke in U.S. Navy seas. The converted fishing vessel was the quiet thing. Its job, while the Hendijan consumed attention, was to transit a specific route through the shipping lane west of Abu Musa and deploy 3 SADAF-type contact mines at positions that the IRGCN's mine warfare planning staff had identified as optimal for the commercial traffic patterns in that lane. SADAF mines are moored contact mines, Iranian-produced, based on Soviet-era designs, detonated by physical contact with a vessel's hull, set to deploy to a specified depth on a mooring cable, in a shipping lane, in a body of water through which approximately 17% of the world's traded oil passes every day. The operational concept was, in the specific vocabulary of someone assessing it after the fact, genuinely concerning in the way that cheap, simple weapons in the right location are genuinely concerning. USS Bulkeley had been operating in the northern Persian Gulf for 11 days, assigned to the 5th Fleet's persistent forward presence mission in the Gulf's upper sector, the area closest to the Iranian coast, where the water is shallowest, where the commercial traffic is densest, and where the IRGCN's operating tempo has historically been highest. 11 days in the northern Gulf produces the specific kind of watch-standing culture that operates where threats are expected rather than anticipated. The difference is that anticipated threats generate heightened alertness, and expected threats generate a calibrated, sustainable operational posture that incorporates the threat picture as a baseline condition. The watch team was not complacent. They were experienced. And experience in this theater looks different from inexperience in ways that matter when something specific begins to develop. The Hendijan appeared at 5:12 on the SPY-1 surface search picture, acquired at 11 nautical miles to the northeast, speed 28 knots, course 235, a course that was taking it directly toward USS Bulkeley's position. The radar operator had the contact on scope for 6 seconds before the classification process was complete. The Hendijan's emission profile, its navigation radar, its communications traffic, its hull form in the radar cross-section return were consistent with the threat library entry for IRGCN Hendijan-class patrol boat. The classification was confirmed. The contact was logged. The tactical action officer noted the contact and noted the closing geometry. At 5:13, the AN/SLQ 32EW suite detected emissions from a second contact. The second contact's emissions were on a commercial maritime frequency, a fishing vessel's navigation radar, broadcasting on a band consistent with the cheap commercially available sets that working fishing boats use. The contact was at 14 nautical miles to the northeast, running southwest at approximately 8 knots. 8 knots. In the surface radar return, it was indistinguishable from the dozens of other contacts in the northern Gulf that morning. The dhows, the fishing boats, the small commercial transports that fill the picture and define the identification challenge that operations in this environment always present. The SLQ-32 noted the emission and logged it. The contact was assigned a track number and placed in the surface picture alongside the Hendijan, the merchant traffic. The ROE confirmed legitimate contacts. It was not immediately flagged as a threat. It was a fishing boat radar running at 8 knots in an area full of fishing boats. This is the identification friction, and it is the heart of the vulnerability that follows. At 5:14, the watch officer's attention was on the Hendijan. The Hendijan was at 9 nautical miles and closing. At 28 knots, it would reach the 5 nautical mile safety threshold in approximately 7 minutes. The rules of engagement for IRGCN fast attack craft required visual identification before any kinetic response was authorized, which meant that if the Hendijan continued its approach and did not respond to radio challenges, USS Bulkeley would need to respond through the graduated warning sequence: radio challenge, course change to demonstrate awareness, visual warning signal, before any engagement was authorized. The watch officer was managing this sequence. The tactical action officer was managing the watch officer managing this sequence. The commanding officer had been notified at 5:13 and was on the bridge at 5:15. The Hendijan was at 8 nautical miles. At exactly 5:15, the SLQ-32 operator reported something that had been developing in the background of the surface picture for 14 minutes, and which required a specific kind of attention to notice in the noise of the northern Gulf's electromagnetic environment. The second contact, the one running at 8 knots on the commercial fishing radar, had maintained a course that for the past 14 minutes had been suspiciously consistent. Not the slightly wandering track of a fishing vessel following fish, adjusting speed and heading as the catch or the current suggested. A straight track, maintained precisely at a constant 8 knots, along a course that ran through the western edge of the commercial shipping lane west of Abu Musa. Straight, constant, purposeful. The SLQ-32 operator had been watching the track develop in the background while the watch team's attention was on the Hendijan. And what he was looking at was a contact that was behaving in a way that fishing boats do not behave when they are fishing. Tau, the SLQ-32 operator said, with the specific tone of someone who has been sitting on an observation long enough to be certain of it before he speaks. The second contact northeast, track 347, has been on a constant heading and speed for 14 minutes. It's not behaving like a fishing vessel. Course puts it through the western shipping lane near Abu Musa waypoint at approximately 0540. He paused for 2 seconds. Recommend we get an MH-60 on it. The tactical action officer looked at track 347's history on his plot display. He looked at the straight line. He looked at the bearing to Abu Musa. He looked at the Hendijan, now at 7 miles and still closing. He had the specific professional experience of someone who has studied the IRGCN's combined arms tactics long enough to recognize the pattern when it appears in real time, rather than in an after-action analysis. Fast attack decoy, separate quiet vessel. Abu Musa approaches. Early morning fishing traffic for cover. He notified the commanding officer at 5:15:47 with 3 words: possible mine layer, and the commanding officer's response: delivered in the specific compressed language of a commanding officer who has processed information and is issuing direction, was, "Get the helo up." The MH-60R was airborne at 5:19, 4 minutes from the commanding officer's order, launching from USS Bulkeley's flight deck into the August pre-dawn with the focused urgency of a crew that has been told something specific is out there and needs to find it. The MH-60R carried a forward-looking infrared sensor suite and a surface search radar that, at its operational altitude, would provide a resolution of Track 347's surface profile that no ship-based sensor could match at the current range. The helicopter pilot was given the Track 347's last known position and intercept geometry and turned northeast. At 5:18, while the MH-60R was still spinning up on deck, the Hendijan altered course. The contact changed, heading from 235 to 290, a course that took it northwest, away from USS Bulkeley's position. The speed remained 28 knots. The Hendijan was leaving. Not slowly, not in a way that suggested a gradual decision to depart. A crisp course change that removed it from the approaching threshold range and put it on a bearing toward the Iranian coastal zone at the same speed it had been using to approach. The watch officer noted the course change with the specific attention of someone who finds the timing of the departure at least as interesting as the approach had been. The Hendijan had turned away at 5:18, 30 seconds before the MH-60R lifted off, as if the approach had served its purpose, and the departure was the planned next step rather than a response to the ship's actions. The MH-60R reached Track 347's position at 5:27, 8 minutes after launch. The FLIR camera resolved the contact from 300 feet altitude with the clarity that close-range infrared imaging provides on a warm August morning in the Persian Gulf. An 18-meter vessel with a modified aft deck, 2 figures visible at the stern. And this is the detail that the MH-60R's sensor operator reported to USS Bulkeley, in a voice that the cockpit audio would later render as comprehensively professional. An object in the water approximately 30 meters astern of the vessel, visible on the FLIR return as a moored object at or just below the surface on a cable that was still unspooling from a spool mount on the modified aft deck. A deployed mine, mooring cable still running. And next to it, at approximately 60 meters, a second object of similar thermal signature. 2 objects deployed. The third was still on the spool. The MH-60R crew had been in the air for 8 minutes. They were looking at a live mine deployment in progress in a commercial shipping lane in the Persian Gulf. The sensor operator reported at 05:28:14, precise and complete, with a specific economy of language that operational reporting requires. Track 347, positive ID as vessel with modified aft deck. 2 objects deployed astern, consistent with moored mines. Deployment in progress. Third object at stern, 2 personnel visible. Position follows. And then the position, latitude and longitude, to 4 decimal places. The MH-60R maintained its position overhead. The commanding officer, who had been at the bridge since 5:15, now had the picture that the preceding 13 minutes had been building toward. He had a confirmed mine-laying vessel deploying in an active commercial shipping lane. He had the authority, under the rules of engagement for mine warfare threats in international waters, to take action to prevent further deployment and to mark the deployed objects for subsequent disposal. He also had the rules of engagement's requirement for the specific legal authority that mine warfare response in international waters requires before action. A requirement that protects against the consequences of misidentification in an environment where a fishing boat with equipment on its stern deck could, in the wrong light and with the wrong assumptions, be miscalled as something it wasn't. The MH-60R had the right light, the right sensor, and the right certainty. The commanding officer transmitted the picture to 5th Fleet at 5:29:22 and requested engagement authority. The authority came back at 5:31 and 8 seconds, 98 seconds from transmission to authorization. This is the legal and command architecture of naval operations working at the speed that genuine threats require. The commanding officer noted the time. He passed the engagement authority to the tactical action officer. The tactical action officer employed the deck-mounted Mk-38 25mm chain gun on USS Bulkeley against the mine-laying vessel. with the guidance that the MH-60R's laser designator provided for targeting precision at 053244. The vessel was rendered inoperable and incapable of further mine deployment. Its crew of 4 entered the water. A rescue swimmer from the MH-60R recovered all 4 personnel. They were detained and treated for minor injuries, consistent with having been on a vessel that was rendered inoperable. The third mine, still in its housing on the aft deck, did not deploy. It was subsequently recovered by the EOD team that the 5th Fleet dispatched to the area. The 2 deployed mines were marked by the MH-60R's FLIR position data, and subsequently located and rendered inoperable by the EOD team over the following 4 hours. The commercial shipping lane was closed to traffic for 6 hours, while the EOD operation was completed and the area was certified clear. 6 vessels that had been scheduled to transit the lane during that period diverted to an alternate route that added between 2 and 4 hours to their transit time. The LNG tanker, whose insurance underwriter received the incident report that afternoon, filed a separate notification to the Maritime Risk Assessment Consortium that covers Gulf shipping. The consortium updated its threat level assessment for the Northern Gulf by 1 tier. The updated assessment was distributed to 73 shipping operators within 18 hours. Now the intelligence picture, because even a mine-laying operation that was interdicted before it achieved its objective, provides the collection architecture with something valuable. The SLQ-32 had been monitoring Track 347's navigation radar emissions since the first contact at 5:01. 31 minutes of emission data from a vessel that was, at the time of collection, operating under the assumption that it was indistinguishable from the fishing traffic it was using for cover. The navigation radar's frequency and pulse characteristics were consistent with a commercially available marine radar set. The specific model that the emission signature indicated was available in the Iranian domestic market and had appeared in 2 previous IRGCN logistics vessel contacts in the past deployment cycle. This confirmed that the IRGCN's mining operation supply chain was using commercially sourced navigation equipment on its mine-laying vessels. Operationally significant because commercial specification navigation radars have specific emission characteristics that the SLQ-32 can flag in the surface picture before the contact's behavior becomes overtly suspicious. The 31-minute dataset provided the clearest commercial navigation equipment on IRGCN mine layer emissions profile that the 5th Fleet EW library had received. The Hendijan's coordination with the mine-laying vessel, the timing of its approach as a decoy, and the timing of its departure as the MH-60R launched, was itself an intelligence product. The operational synchronization told the intelligence cell something about how the IRGCN's mine warfare planning staff communicates with its decoy element. Specifically, the Hendijan turned away at 5:18, which was after the commanding officer's "Get the helo up" order at 5:15:47, but before the MH-60R lifted off at 5:19. The timing suggested the Hendijan commander had received a signal from somewhere, either from the mine-laying vessel's crew, who may have seen the MH-60R begin to spin up on USS Bulkeley's deck, or from a shore-based monitoring element tracking USS Bulkeley's flight deck activity by visual or signals means. Either way, the synchronization timing put a specific upper bound on the communication latency in the IRGCN's decoy and mine layer coordination protocol. That latency estimate was worth having. The recovered mine, the third one, the one that did not deploy, was transferred to the EOD team and subsequently to the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Technical Intelligence Program. The SADAF mine recovered from the deck was of a production variant that the Technical Intelligence Program had not previously examined in unmodified condition. Previous SADAF analysis had relied on post-detonation fragments and intelligence imagery. An intact, undetonated, unmodified specimen provided the technical intelligence team with component-level analysis capability that imagery and fragments cannot match. The mine's detonator assembly, mooring mechanism, and explosive fill were characterized. The characterization updated the minesweeping and countermine doctrine that the 5th Fleet uses for the Northern Gulf. The mine had been retrieved still in its casing. It had provided, in that condition, a level of technical intelligence that was assessed by the 5th Fleet explosive ordnance disposal intelligence staff as equivalent to recovering an adversary's latest production standard weapon system intact from the field. The money picture on this operation is, as always, instructive. The IRGCN operation's total cost: 3 SADAF mines at approximately $15,000 each, $45,000. The Hendijan sortie's fuel and operational overhead, $8,000. The converted mine-laying vessel's operational cost, $6,000. Total IRGCN. Operational investment, approximately $59,000. Mission objective: deploy 3 mines in a commercial shipping lane to disrupt Gulf transit and demonstrate that the IRGCN can threaten commercial shipping despite U.S. naval presence. Mission outcome: 2 mines deployed and subsequently rendered inoperable by EOD. 3rd mine recovered intact. 4 personnel detained. Vessel rendered inoperable. 6 hours of lane closure, affecting 6 vessels. USS Bulkeley's additional operational cost: MH-60R flight operations at $18,000. EOD team dispatch and operations at $85,000. The additional watch standing overhead for the encounter and subsequent sweep operation at $35,000. Total additional U.S. cost, approximately $140,000. The intact SADAF mine's technical intelligence value: previously unexamined production variant, complete detonator and fuse assembly characterization, mine sweeping doctrine update, was assessed by the 5th Fleet Intelligence Staff at approximately $2.2 million in technical collection equivalents. The mine that did not go into the water was worth approximately 500 times more to the collection program than the mines that did. This is the specific economy of technical intelligence collection, where the intact item always pays dividends that the deployed item cannot. The 6 hours of lane closure cost the shipping operators, who diverted approximately $340,000 in total additional fuel and time costs. The LNG tanker's insurance underwriter absorbed a schedule deviation charge of approximately $45,000. The Maritime Risk Consortium's elevated threat assessment will increase insurance premiums for Gulf shipping by an estimated $2 to $4 million per month across the affected vessel categories for as long as the elevated assessment remains in effect. The IRGCN spent $59,000. The commercial disruption cost ran to several million in the first month alone. The mine warfare cost-exchange ratio is, in this specific accounting, more favorable to the adversary than most scenarios in this channel's operating repertoire. This is acknowledged. Cheap weapons deployed in high-value choke points have this property as a category, and the IRGCN's mine warfare doctrine reflects an institutional understanding of it. What the accounting does not include on the IRGCN's side: 4 personnel detained and processed through the 5th Fleet's detainee handling procedure. 1 vessel rendered inoperable. 1 intact mine in the U.S. Technical Intelligence Program's possession. A detailed SLQ-32 emissions profile of their mine-laying vessel type. A synchronization timing estimate for their decoy and mine layer coordination protocol. All of these are costs that do not appear in the IRGCN operations staff's cost column because they are qualitative rather than financial. But they are real, they are accumulated, and they are in files that will be referenced the next time this operation is attempted with a vessel of this type. The Iranian media operations treatment of the incident was notable for what it did not say. There was no claim of a successful operation. There was no broadcast describing the mines as having been deployed. There was no narrative about IRGCN assertion of sovereignty in the Gulf. The institutional silence was complete and immediate. The specific silence of an organization that has had an operation fail visibly and publicly enough that no amount of reframing makes the silence worse than the alternative. The 4 detained personnel were not mentioned. The recovered mine was not mentioned. The Hendijan's departure before the MH-60R lifted off was not mentioned. The silence was noted, cataloged, and added to the intelligence cell's assessment of how the IRGCN responds internally to failed operations as a behavioral indicator of the institution's propaganda decision calculus. Silence as data. The SLQ-32 had data. The institutional silence was also data. Both went into the file. The commanding officer's post-incident report was filed at 14:30 that Wednesday. 6 hours after the EOD team completed the lane clearance. It was thorough, precise, and contained in its executive summary a sentence that the commanding officer wrote himself: "The simultaneous management of the decoy contact and the identification of the mining vessel required watch team performance consistent with the highest standards of naval vigilance and reflected the professional competence developed through sustained operations in this environment." This sentence in the vocabulary of naval leadership is how commanding officers tell their watch teams they got it right when well done is not sufficient to the weight of what they actually did. The watch team received it. The SLQ-32 operator received it. The MH-60R crew received it. The EOD team received a separate commendation. Nobody lost sleep. Some people had a very good day. The northern Persian Gulf was already preparing its next morning's fishing fleet, the same way it always does, the same way it did when the mine-laying vessel departed, and the same way it will do when whatever the IRGCN tries next departs into it. Bye for now.